The Houston sun blazed like a furnace, its light splintering off the glass towers that pierced the summer sky, a city of ambition and unrelenting heat. On the broad sidewalk, Eleanor Nora Mitchell's heels struck the pavement with a rhythm of purpose, each step a declaration in a world that often demanded she prove herself twice over. At 42, Nora was the CEO of Mitchell Financial Solutions, a firm she built from a single desk in a rented office to a player in the national consulting scene. Her caramel brown suit, tailored to precision, hugged her frame, and her tightly coiled hair framed a face that held both warmth and steel. Today, she was here to secure a loan from Sterling Summit Bank, a deal that could propel her company onto the global stage or leave her dreams in the dust. As she approached the bank's towering facade, she didn't know that a single morning would test her resilience, expose a system's quiet cruelty, and set her on a path to change it forever. The automatic glass doors of Sterling Summit Bank slid open with a whisper, pulling Nora into a world where power was as palpable as the air-conditioned chill. The lobby soared overhead, a cathedral of wealth with crystal chandeliers casting prisms of cold light across polished marble floors. The scent of espresso mingled with new leather from designer sofas, a faint trace of polish on dark wood panels, and the barest hint of expensive perfume, an olfactory reminder that this was a place where clients were expected to know their place. Lush potted plants flanked expansive windows, their leaves catching the sunlight in sharp green edges, while rows of leather benches invited waiting but promised no comfort. Every detail, from the soft amber glow of recessed lighting to the steady tap of leather shoes, screamed control, a space designed to awe and intimidate. Nora's eyes adjusted to the shift from Houston's glare to the lobby's curated dusk. She moved toward the reception desk, her leather handbag a quiet weight against her shoulder, her posture unyielding despite the familiar weight of being watched. She'd been here before, not this bank, but places like it, where her presence, a black woman in a tailored suit, seemed to unsettle the unspoken order. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a lesson from a childhood in rural Texas. Twice the effort, 3 times the patience, 10 times the courage. Nora had built her career on those words, turning skepticism into contracts, doubt into respect. But today, as she stepped into Sterling Summit's domain, she felt the old challenge rise again, a silent question. Would this place see her, or would it try to make her invisible? At the reception desk, Claire Bennett looked up, her blonde hair pulled into a flawless bun, her nude lipstick accentuating a smile that was all polish and no warmth. Her blue eyes flicked over Nora, her suit, her hair, her matte black heels in a swift, practiced evaluation, the kind that sorted people in seconds. "Welcome to Sterling Summit," Claire said, her voice crisp, professional, but edged with indifference. "Do you have an appointment?" Nora returned the smile, her own steady and deliberate, a shield she'd perfected over years. "I'm Nora Mitchell. I have an appointment with Mr. Edward Thornton at 11. Claire's fingers danced across her keyboard, her gaze fixed on the screen, as if Nora's presence were already an afterthought. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, I see your name. Please take a seat. Mr. Thornton will see you shortly." The words were courteous, but the tone carried a dismissal, a signal that Nora was just another entry in a long list, not worthy of special attention. No offer of water, no inquiry about her comfort, no genuine courtesy that Nora had come to expect at high-level meetings. Claire pointed to the waiting area, a row of leather benches under the chandeliers, and turned back to her monitor. Her attention already elsewhere, Nora drew a slow breath, tamping down the flicker of disappointment it sparked in her chest. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such a reception, and it wouldn't be the last. She'd learned long ago to swallow the sting, to channel it into focus. But today, with so much riding on this meeting, the slight felt sharper, a needle under her skin. She moved to a bench near a floor-to-ceiling window, the early summer sun slanting through the glass, tracing sharp patterns across the stone floor. Settling her handbag beside her, she sat with her back straight, her hands folded, and observed the lobby's orchestrated dance. The space hummed with quiet activity. Employees in crisp white shirts and ties murmured over iPads, their voices low, confident, as if privilege were hardwired into the walls. In the distance, a group of men in impeccable suits laughed softly, their conversation peppered with terms like equity and mergers, a secret language of the elite. A woman in a designer dress, her Prada bag gleaming, glided past. Her presence, commanding a subtle shift in the room's energy, heads turned. Smiles widened. Nora's watch read 10:45. She was early, as always, a habit born of necessity in a world where a single minute late could be branded unprofessional for someone like her. Punctuality was her armor, one of the small details that had built her reputation as a CEO who never faltered. But as she sat, the lobby's rhythm began to reveal its undercurrent. A middle-aged white man in a gray suit approached the desk. His arrival met with a warm nod from Claire. Within seconds, a staffer escorted him past the frosted glass doors to the inner offices, no questions asked. Nora's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind cataloging the moment. Another client, a younger man with slicked back hair and a flashy watch, breezed in, joking with Claire as if they were old friends. He barely signed the registry before disappearing into the VIP corridor. The pattern was clear, and it wasn't lost on Nora. Some walked through doors. Others waited. Her phone buzzed softly in her bag, a reminder of the stakes. She glanced at the screen, an email from her lead analyst, marked urgent. Client pushing for confirmation on the expansion. Need loan approval by EOD, or we risk losing the contract. The words tightened her chest, a reminder that this wasn't just about her pride. Her firm employed dozens, mostly young professionals of color, who'd bet their futures on her vision. Failure here could ripple outward, stalling careers, dreams, lives. She slipped the phone back into her bag, her resolve hardening like steel. Across the lobby, two employees lingered near a coffee station, their voices low but audible. Tight schedules for non-VIPs today, one said, a woman with a clipboard, her tone casual, as if discussing the weather. The other, a young man, chuckled. Yeah, Darton's got his favorites. The words landed like a stone in Nora's gut, confirmation of what she'd suspected. She caught the woman's eye for a moment, a junior employee, maybe mid-20s, with a flicker of unease before she looked away, rebuked by a sharp glance from Claire, who'd overheard. Nora's fingers tightened around her bag's strap, her mother's voice echoing again. Courage, Nora. Always courage. She'd faced rooms like this before, boardrooms, galas, negotiations where her presence was a disruption, her success a surprise. Once, at a corporate event in Dallas, a white executive had mistaken her for a server, his laugh dismissive when she corrected him. The memory stung, but it also fueled her. She wouldn't let Sterling Summit's polished indifference diminish her today. The clock ticked to 10:55. 5 minutes to her appointment. Nora's eyes drifted to the frosted glass doors at the lobby's far end, the gateway to the bank's inner sanctum. Beyond them lay Edward Thornton, the man who held the key to her company's future. She didn't know him yet, didn't know the system he upheld, but she knew this. She was here, prepared, qualified, and entitled to the same respect as anyone else. The sunlight warmed her shoulder through the window, a quiet ally in the cold expanse of the lobby. She sat taller, her gaze steady, a woman ready to claim her place, even if it meant forcing the doors open herself. The marble floor of Sterling Summit Bank's lobby gleamed under the shifting sunlight, a cold mirror to the heat pulsing outside Houston's glass towers. Nora Mitchell sat on a leather bench, her posture unyielding despite the ache creeping into her shoulders, her caramel brown suit still crisp against the sterile chill. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 a.m., the appointed hour for her meeting with Edward Thornton, but the frosted glass doors to the inner offices remained closed, a silent barrier between her and the loan that could redefine her company's future. Around her, the lobby hummed with the quiet arrogance of wealth employees gliding past with iPads, clients in tailored suits murmuring about deals, the air thick with espresso and exclusivity. Nora's fingers rested on her handbag, her gaze steady, but beneath her calm exterior, a familiar anger simmered, stoked by the minutes that stretched on and the unmistakable pattern unfolding before her eyes. It was 11:05 now, and no one had called her name. The sunlight slanted further across the floor, its sharp edges crawling like a countdown. Nora's mind flickered to the email she'd received just before entering the bank, its words branded into her thoughts. Client pushing for confirmation on the expansion. Need loan approval by EOD or we risk losing the contract. The stakes weren't just financial. Mitchell Financial Solutions employed 32 people, most of them young, many of them Black or Latino, who trusted her to build a future where they could thrive. Failure here wouldn't just stall her company. It would betray those who'd bet on her vision. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the lobby, her eyes cataloging every detail. Every slight dot. Claire Bennett, the receptionist, sat behind her polished desk, her blonde bun flawless, her fingers tapping rhythmically on a keyboard. Her smile, when it appeared, was a calculated flicker, reserved for those she deemed worthy. Nora had felt the weight of Claire's initial glance, a swift, dismissive scan of her suit, her hair, her presence, and knew it wasn't personal, not exactly. It was the system, a machine that sorted people by invisible criteria, and Nora, with her dark skin and unapologetic confidence, didn't fit the mold. She'd seen that look before, in boardrooms and galas, the kind that said, "You're here. But do you belong?" Her mother's voice rose again, steady as ever. 3 times the patience, Nora. But patience was a finite resource, and Nora felt it draining with each tick of the clock. The lobby's rhythm shifted, a subtle quickening of energy. A middle-aged white man in a gray suit approached Claire's desk, his briefcase gleaming. His posture relaxed with the ease of someone who expected doors to open. Claire's face transformed, her smile warming, her voice softening. "Mr. Reynolds, so good to see you," she said, as if greeting an old friend. Within seconds, a staffer materialized, escorting him through the frosted doors without a glance at the registry. Nora's jaw tightened, her fingers curling slightly. She told herself it was coincidence, a scheduling quirk, but the pattern was forming, too clear to ignore. At 11:15, another client arrived, a woman in a designer dress, her Prada bag catching the chandelier's light. Margaret Maggie Caldwell, Nora would later learn, a regular whose presence commanded the room. Claire's deference was immediate, her tone almost reverent. "Mrs. Caldwell, the boardroom's ready," she said, standing to gesture toward the VIP corridor. Maggie nodded, her golden hair catching the light, and glided past without signing in, her heels a soft counterpoint to the lobby's hum. The doors closed behind her, and Nora felt the air grow heavier, the weight of being overlooked pressing against her chest. She glanced at her watch. 11:20. The sunlight had shifted again, its warmth a faint comfort against the lobby's chill. Across the room, 2 employees lingered near a potted plant, their voices low but careless. "Thornton's tied up with the big accounts today," one said, a young woman with a clipboard, her tone matter-of-fact. "Non-vine GIPs get the back burner." The other, a man in his 30s, smirked. "Always does." Nora's breath caught, the words a confirmation of what she'd sensed. She caught the woman's eye, a junior employee, maybe Sarah, from the name. Tegan saw a flicker of unease, quickly masked as Claire's sharp glance silenced them. Sarah turned away, her clipboard clutched tighter, but the moment lingered. A crack in the lobby's polished facade. Nora's phone buzzed again. Another email from her analyst. Client's getting antsy. Any update on the loan? The words were a jolt, sharpening her focus. She couldn't afford to lose this contract. Not for her team, not for the community she'd promised to uplift. Her firm's expansion would mean jobs, opportunities, a chance to prove that success didn't have to look like Maggie Caldwell or Mr. Reynolds. But sitting here, waiting while others waltzed through, she felt the old wounds reopen, memories of being passed over for promotions, of hearing not the right fit despite her qualifications. Once, at a tech conference, a white VP had handed her his coat, assuming she was staff. She'd corrected him with a smile, but the humiliation had burned. Today, that burn was fueled at 11:30. The lobby's rhythm grew bolder, its exclusions more blatant. Two young men in sharp suits breezed in, their laughter loud, their watches flashing. Claire greeted them like regulars, her smile genuine now. Back so soon? She teased, waving them through with barely a glance at the registry. They disappeared behind the doors, their voices fading into the sanctum Nora couldn't reach. In a corner, a white couple chatted with a staffer, their appointment whisked forward without delay. Nora sat alone, the only figure left in the waiting area, her bench a small island in the lobby's sea of privilege. The isolation was suffocating, a deliberate erasure. Nora's eyes drifted to the chandelier, its prisms scattering light like shards of ice. She'd told herself she was used to this, the polite indifference, the subtle sorting. But today, surrounded by people who looked nothing like her, the pain was raw, a blade twisting in her gut. Her mother's words fought for space, 10 times the courage. But courage wasn't just action. It was enduring this, sitting tall while the system tried to make her small. She straightened, her gaze locking on Claire, who met it with a blank, unreadable stare before returning to her screen. A soft clink broke Nora's focus, a bottled water placed on the bench beside her. She looked up to find Sarah, the junior employee, her expression hesitant but kind. "Thought you might need this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Nora could respond, Claire's sharp "Sarah" cut through, and the young woman scurried back, her face flushed. The gesture was small, a drop of warmth in the lobby's cold, but it landed like a lifeline. Nora's fingers closed around the bottle, her resolve sharpening. Someone had seen her, even if the system hadn't. The clock hit 11:35. The sunlight crept further, its edges now touching the frosted doors. Nora's patience was a thread stretched to breaking, her anger a fire she could no longer bank. She thought of her team, waiting for news, of the contract slipping away, of every time she'd swallowed this indignity to keep moving forward. No more. She stood, her handbag a steady weight, her heels firm against the marble. The lobby seemed to pause, a few heads turning, their glances a mix of surprise and disdain, as if she'd broken an unspoken rule. Nora didn't care. She was done waiting. The lobby of Sterling Summit Bank was a theater of power, its marble floor a stage where privilege played out in quiet, deliberate acts. Nora Mitchell sat alone on her leather bench, the only figure left in the waiting area, her caramel brown suit a stark contrast to the cold gleam of the chandelier's light. The clock on the wall read 12 p.m., an hour past her scheduled meeting with Edward Thornton, and the frosted glass doors to the inner offices remained sealed, a mocking barrier. Outside, Houston's summer sun blazed, but inside, the air-conditioned chill seemed to freeze time itself, each tick of the clock a needle in Nora's patience. Her handbag rested beside her, a silent anchor, but her eyes burned with a fire that had been smoldering since she arrived, a fire fueled by the blatant exclusions unfolding around her, by the weight of a system that dared to make her invisible. The lobby's rhythm had grown brazen, its favoritism no longer subtle. Nora's watch ticked to 12:05, and still no one called her name. The sunlight, now a narrow band across the floor, felt like a fading ally, its warmth unable to pierce the cold indifference of the space. She'd watched client after client, white, well-dressed, exuding entitlement, glide through the frosted doors with barely a pause. Margaret Maggie Caldwell, the golden-haired regular, had been ushered in like royalty, her Prada bag a passport Claire Bennett honored without question. A gray-suited man, a pair of young brokers, a couple with expensive watches, all had bypassed the registry, their names met with smiles, their presence deemed worthy. Nora, CEO of Mitchell Financial Solutions, sat untouched, her appointment a forgotten line in Claire's system. Her phone lay silent in her bag, but the memory of the morning's emails pulsed in her mind. Need loan approval by EOD, or we risk losing the contract. The words were a drumbeat, a reminder of the 32 employees counting on her, the young faces who joined her firm for a chance at something better. Failure here would ripple outward, stalling their dreams, dimming the light she'd worked so hard to kindle. Nora's fingers tightened on her bag strap, her mother's voice a steady echo. 10 times the courage. Courage wasn't just for battles. It was for moments like this, when the world tried to shrink you, when every glance and empty promise conspired to erase your worth. Across the lobby, Claire sat at her desk, her blonde bun a crown of cold efficiency, her eyes flicking between her screen and the parade of favored clients. Nora studied her, noting the calculated tilt of her head, the way her smile bloomed for some and withered for others. It wasn't personal, Nora knew, but it was deliberate, a system of sorting, honed to perfection. She thought of the junior employee, Sarah, who'd slipped her a bottled water 20 minutes ago, a small act of kindness that had sparked a flicker of hope. Sarah was nowhere now, likely chastised by Claire's sharp rebuke, but her gesture lingered, a reminder that not everyone in this place was complicit. The lobby's hum shifted, a new scene in its relentless play. The frosted door swung open, and a man emerged, his navy suit impeccable, his salt and pepper hair styled with precision. Edward Thornton, Nora presumed, the branch manager whose name adorned her appointment. He escorted Maggie Caldwell, his smile warm, his hand lightly, guiding her elbow as they crossed the lobby. Maggie's laugh was soft, privileged, her presence commanding the room's attention. "Always a pleasure, Ed," she said, her voice carrying the ease of someone who never waited. Thornton nodded, his charm polished but reserved, a man who knew the value of his favor. His eyes swept the lobby, landing on Nora for a fleeting moment, a glance that held no recognition, only dismissal before he turned back to Maggie, ushering her toward the exit. The doors closed behind Maggie, and Thornton disappeared into the corridor, leaving Nora with a fresh wound. That glance, brief as it was, had said everything. She was invisible to him, a name on a schedule he could ignore. Her chest tightened, anger and humiliation twisting together, but she forced a slow breath, her mother's words grounding her. Twice the effort. She'd built her company from nothing, turned skeptics into clients, earned her place in rooms like this. Yet here, in Sterling Summit's gilded cage, effort wasn't enough. The realization was a spark, igniting something deeper, a defiance that had been dormant too long. Nora's eyes drifted to the employees across the room, their voices low but reckless. "Thornton's got his priorities," one said, a woman, with a sleek ponytail, her tone casual as she adjusted a stack of files. "Big accounts first, always." The man beside her, older, with a tie slightly askew, snorted. "Yeah, keeps the board happy." They stood near a potted plant, oblivious to Nora's presence, their words a window into the bank's soul. She caught the woman's eye against Sarah, the name tag confirmed, and saw that same unease, a flicker of guilt before Sarah looked away, her shoulders hunching under the weight of complicity. The clock hit 12:10. Nora's patience was a thread snapped, her anger a tide she could no longer hold back. She thought of her team, of the contract slipping away, of every time she'd swallowed this indignity to keep moving forward. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. A boardroom in Austin years ago, where a white executive had questioned her. Credentials mid-presentation, his tone dripping with doubt. She'd answered with data, with poise, but the shame had lingered, a scar she carried. Today, that scar burned, a reminder of why she couldn't stay silent. She stood, her handbag, steady weight, her heels firm against the marble. The lobby seemed to pause, a few heads turning, their glances a mix of surprise and disdain, as if she'd broken an unspoken rule. Nora didn't care. She was done waiting. Her eyes locked on Claire, who met her gaze with a blank, unreadable stare, her fingers stilling on the keyboard. Nora took a step toward the desk, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Excuse me," she said, each word deliberate. "Has Mr. Thornton been informed I'm still waiting?" Claire's smile was a reflex, empty and practiced. "He's in a meeting," she said, her tone clipped, her eyes flicking back to her screen. "We'll see you shortly." Nora's jaw tightened. "Could you give me a more specific estimate?" She pressed, her voice calm but unyielding. She'd learned long ago that vague promises were traps, designed to keep people like her in place. Claire shrugged, her gaze fixed on the monitor. "I'm not sure. It shouldn't be long." The words were a dismissal, a breeze that carried no weight, but they hit Nora like a slap. Behind the courtesy, the message was clear. "You're not important enough to matter." Nora stood for a moment, her eyes searching Claire's for a spark of empathy, but found only a wall of indifference. The lobby's hum resumed, employees moving, clients passing, the system churning on. But inside Nora, something had shifted, a seed of defiance taking root. She wouldn't leave, wouldn't let this place diminish her. Her mother's voice rang clear. "Courage, Nora." She turned back to her bench, her steps measured, but her mind was racing. The wait was no longer just a delay. It was a challenge, one she was ready to meet. The lobby of Sterling Summit Bank pulsed with a quiet arrogance, its marble floor reflecting the cold prisms of chandelier light like a stage set for exclusion. Nora Mitchell stood by her leather bench, her caramel brown suit a defiant contrast. To the sterile elegance, her handbag a steady weight in her hand. The clock on the wall read 12:15 p.m., over an hour past her scheduled meeting with Edward Thornton, and the frosted glass doors to the inner offices loomed like a fortress gate, unyielding. Houston's summer sun burned outside, but inside, the air-conditioned chill seemed to crystallize Nora's anger. Each tick of the clock, a spark to the fire that had been smoldering since she arrived. She was done waiting, done being rendered invisible by a system that thrived on silent hierarchies. With a steadying breath, she took a step forward, her heels striking the marble like a war drum, ready to shatter the bank's polished indifference. Claire Bennett, perched behind her reception desk, froze mid-keystroke, her blonde bun catching the light as Nora approached. Her blue eyes flicked upward, meeting Nora's with a flicker of surprise, then hardening into the familiar wall of cold efficiency. "Excuse me," Nora said, her voice low but edged with steel, each word a deliberate challenge. "I've been waiting over an hour. I need to see Mr. Thornton now." The lobby seemed to hush, a few employees glancing over, their murmurs fading as if Nora had broken an unspoken script. Claire's smile was a reflex, thin and empty. "He's in a meeting," she said, her tone clipped, her fingers resuming their dance on the keyboard. "You'll be called shortly." The words were a practiced dismissal, a gatekeeper's mantra, but they landed like fuel on Nora's resolve. "I've heard shortly for an hour," Nora replied, her voice unwavering, her gaze locking. On to Claire's. I had an appointment at 11. I'm not waiting any longer. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to make her presence undeniable. Either you inform Mr. Thornton I'm here, or I'll find him myself. Claire's composure cracked, her eyes darting to the side as if seeking rescue. You can't just, she began, but Nora was already moving, her heels echoing with purpose as she strode toward the frosted glass doors. Ma'am, you can't go in there. Claire's voice rose, a sharp protest, but Nora didn't glance back. She flashed Claire a look calm, unyielding, the kind that said routine refusals were no longer enough. The doors loomed closer, their opaque surface a symbol of the power she'd been denied. But Nora was done asking for permission. Her hand pushed the door open, the hinges whispering as she stepped into a dark paneled hallway, a corridor of authority, where the air felt heavier, laced with the scent of polished wood and corporate ambition. The recessed lighting cast a soft yellow glow, illuminating brass nameplates on closed doors, each a marker of the bank's inner sanctum. The only sound was the low hum of an air conditioner, a quiet sigh that seemed to echo Nora's resolve. She scanned the hallway, her heart pounding but her step steady. How many times had she been relegated to side rooms, told to wait, her presence tolerated but never welcomed? Today, she was rewriting the rules at the corridor's end. A nameplate gleamed. Edward Thornton, branch manager. Nora paused, smoothing the collar of her blazer, her mother's voice a steady pulse. 10 times the courage. She knocked, neither too hard nor too soft, a sound that demanded attention without apology. Inside, a muffled voice paused, then resumed a phone call, clipped and authoritative. Nora didn't wait for an invitation. She turned the handle and stepped in, closing the door behind her with a soft click, her eyes locking onto the man behind the desk. Edward Thornton looked up, his steely gray eyes narrowing, his navy suit as polished as the mahogany desk before him. Mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and a posture that exuded control, he was a man accustomed to dictating terms. His hand hovered over the phone, mid-sentence, his annoyance palpable as he registered Nora's presence. "I'll call you back," he said into the receiver, his voice tight, and hung up. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone a blend of irritation and condescension, as if Nora were an errand employee rather than a client. "I'm Nora Mitchell," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, standing tall in the center of the room. "I had an appointment with you at 11. I've been waiting over an hour while others were ushered in without delay. I'd like to know why." Thornton's brow furrowed, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk, a telltale sign of discomfort, masked by practiced calm. "Miss Mitchell, I'm afraid there's been a scheduling issue," he said, his voice smooth but hollow, the kind of excuse polished by years of use. "We're extremely busy today, with several priority clients. If you'll return to the lobby, I'll see you as soon as possible." Nora didn't move. "I'm a client," she said, each word deliberate, her gaze piercing. "I confirmed my appointment, arrived early, and have watched at least 5 others, some without appointments, go ahead of me. Why?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable, a blade aimed at the heart of Thornton's system. His smile faltered, a crack in his facade. "It's not intentional," he said, leaning back, his hands clasping as if to steady himself. "We have protocols for VIPs, directives from corporate. Sometimes schedules overlap." The words were a shield, but Nora saw the unease in his eyes, the flicker of a man who'd relied on those protocols to maintain control. "Protocols," Nora repeated, her voice low, almost a whisper, but heavy with intent. "Or choices?" Because, from where I sat, it looked like a choice to prioritize certain clients, white clients, while I was left invisible. The accusation landed like a stone, the room's air thickening with its weight. Thornton's fingers stopped drumming, his knuckles whitening against the desk. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Nora stood firm, her heart racing but her stance unshaken, the memory of her mother's. Lessons anchoring her, twice the effort, 3 times the patience. The patience had run dry, and effort alone wasn't enough in a place like this. Thornton's world was built on exclusions, and Nora was here to tear down its walls. Thornton cleared his throat, attempting to reclaim authority. "Miss Mitchell, I assure you, there's no discrimination here," he said, his voice straining for conviction. "We evaluate clients based on financial profiles, history." He reached for a stack of files, as if paperwork could deflect her words. "Then evaluate mine," Nora cut in, her voice rising just enough to command the room. "I run a company with a flawless record, a loan application that meets every standard. Yet I'm the one waiting, while others walk through. If it's not discrimination, what is it?" Her question was a mirror, forcing Thornton to face the truth he dodged for years. His eyes flickered, a man caught between denial and exposure. Nora knew his type men who thrived on control, who'd climbed the ladder by knowing which hands to shake, which clients to favor. She'd heard whispers about Thornton in Houston's financial circles, a manager who dodged scrutiny by aligning with the right accounts, his favoritism a poorly kept secret. But today, that secret was unraveling, and Nora was the thread pulling it apart. The phone on Thornton's desk buzzed, a sharp interruption. He glanced at it, his expression tightening. A message from corporate, perhaps, or a staffer warning of the board's imminent arrival. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice clipped, "let's discuss your loan. I'm sure we can resolve this quickly." The shift to business was desperate, a lifeline to avoid the deeper issue, but Nora wasn't here for quick fixes. "Before we discuss numbers," she said, stepping closer, her voice ablade, "I want you to face this reality. Those who went before me, what set them apart? Beyond fitting your definition of priority." The room seemed to shrink, the dark paneling and pale lights powerless against the weight of her words. Thornton's hands clenched, his breath shallow, a man staring down the truth he'd built his career to ignore. The air in Edward Thornton's office was thick with tension, the dark paneled walls seeming to close in as Nora Mitchell stood unwavering, her caramel brown suit a beacon of defiance against the sterile glow of recessed lights. Her words, what set them apart? Beyond fitting your definition of priority? Hung like a blade, slicing through Thornton's polished excuses. His steely gray eyes flickered with unease, his knuckles white against the mahogany desk, a man caught in the unraveling of his carefully curated world. Nora's heart pounded, but her gaze held firm, anchored by years of resilience and the memory of her mother's voice. 10 times the courage. She'd stormed this fortress of power, demanding answers for the hour she'd been left invisible in Sterling Summit Bank's lobby. And now, with Thornton's silence deafening, she sensed the ground shifting beneath them both. The moment shattered. With the sharp click of leather shoes on the carpeted hallway outside, a confident stride that cut through the office's stifling air. The door swung open, and Charlie Whitaker, CEO of Sterling Summit Bank, stepped in, flanked by 2 board members in tailored suits. Charlie's presence was a force tall, mid-60s, with silver hair and a commanding aura that filled the room like a storm breaking. His sharp blue eyes swept the scene, landing on Nora with a spark of recognition that shifted to surprise, then hardened into something colder as he registered the tension. Thornton's face drained of color, his hands fumbling with the files on his desk, a man staring down the end of his reign. "Nora Mitchell," Charlie said, his voice warm but edged with authority, stepping forward to extend a hand, ignoring Thornton as if he were a ghost. "I didn't expect to see you here." His smile was genuine, a nod to their past collaboration 2 years ago, when Nora's firm, Mitchell Financial Solutions, had guided Sterling Summit through a digital transformation, saving millions. That project had earned Charlie's respect. A rare bond in a world of fleeting alliances, and now, seeing her in Thornton's office, unannounced and unyielding, he sensed something gravely amiss. Nora shook his hand, her grip steady, her voice calm but resonant. "Good to see you too, Charlie. I had an appointment with Mr. Thornton at 11, but I've been waiting over an hour. I decided to find him myself." The words were simple, but they landed like a gavel, each syllable exposing the fault lines in Thornton's system. Charlie's smile vanished, his eyes narrowing as he turned to Thornton, who stood frozen, his tie slightly askew, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "An hour?" Charlie repeated, his voice low, dangerous, the kind that silenced boardrooms. "Explain, Ed." The question was a command, and the room seemed to shrink under its weight. The board members, older men with stern faces and expensive watches, exchanged glances, their frowns signaling a corporate reckoning. Nora stood tall, her handbag at her side, her presence a quiet force that demanded truth. Thornton stammered, his voice cracking under the scrutiny. "There was a scheduling mix-up, sir," he said, his hands gesturing vaguely at the files. "We've had priority clients, VIP directives from corporate. I was just about to see Miss Mitchell." His words faltered as Charlie raised a hand, a gesture that cut through the excuses like a blade. "I want to hear from Nora," Charlie said, his gaze returning to her, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "Tell me exactly what happened." The board members leaned in, their silence a weight, their notepads untouched, but their eyes sharp. Thornton's breath hitched, his career teetering on the edge of Nora's next words. Nora drew a steady breath, her voice clear, each sentence a brick in the case against Thornton's system. "I arrived at 10:45 for an 11 a.m. appointment," she began, her eyes meeting Charlie's, then sweeping to the board members. "I confirmed with the receptionist, Claire Bennett, and was told to wait. Over the next hour, I watched at least 5 clients, none with visible appointments, be escorted to the inner offices. A man in a gray suit, 2 young brokers, a couple, and Margaret Caldwell, who was greeted like royalty. All white, all prioritized." Claire offered no updates, no apologies, just shortly, "And he's in a meeting." I approached her twice, but got nothing, so I walked in here myself. The room was still, the air heavy with the truth she'd laid bare. Thornton's face was ashen, his fingers clutching the desk as if it could anchor him. The board members' frowns deepened, one jotting a note, the other's jaw tightening. Charlie's expression darkened, his hands clenching briefly before he spoke. "You waited an hour and 15 minutes, he said, his voice a controlled burn, while others were ushered in. Is that correct?" "Yes," Nora said, her voice unwavering. "And I overheard staff saying non-VIPs get the back burner. It wasn't a mix-up. It was a choice." The word choice echoed her earlier accusation to Thornton, now amplified in the presence of power, a mirror to the bank's silent biases. Charlie turned to Thornton, his gaze like ice. "Ed, is this how we treat clients at Sterling Summit?" The question was rhetorical, a verdict wrapped in civility. Thornton opened his mouth, but no words came, his excuses exhausted. Nora saw the cracks in his facade, years of favoritism, of skating by on charm and connections, now exposed. She'd heard whispers about Thornton in Houston's financial circles, a manager who dodged scrutiny by prioritizing big accounts, his bias a poorly kept secret. But today, that secret was a noose, and Nora's voice had tightened it. The board member to Charlie's left, a man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke, his voice measured but stern. "This is unacceptable, Ed. Miss Mitchell's firm has worked with us before. She's not just any client. The words were a rebuke, and Thornton flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. Nora felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was tempered by the weight of what she'd endured, not just today, but in countless rooms where her worth had been questioned. Charlie's voice cut through again, sharp and final. "Nora, I apologize for this failure," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that carried the weight of their shared history. "This isn't the sterling summit I lead. I need your full account, everything, from the moment you walked in." He gestured to a chair, but Nora remained standing, her presence a statement. She recounted the details again: Claire's cold dismissal, the preferential treatment of Maggie and others, the staff's careless comments about non-VIPs. Her voice was steady, but each word carried the pain of being sidelined, the resolve of refusing to stay silent. As she spoke, Charlie's expression hardened, his anger directed not just at Thornton, but at the system he'd failed to oversee. Nora knew Charlie wasn't blameless 2 years ago. During their collaboration, she'd sensed his blind spots, his trust in branch managers like Thornton to uphold the bank's values. But today, he was listening, and that was a start. The board members took notes now, their pens scratching in the silence, a signal that this wasn't just a moment, it was a turning point. Thornton's phone buzzed again, ignored this time, its vibration a faint echo of his unraveling authority. Nora finished her account, her final words a quiet challenge. "I'm not the only one this happens to. If you want fairness, it starts with facing the truth." Charlie nodded, his jaw tight, and turned to Thornton, whose silence was now confession. "Ed," Charlie said, his voice like a gavel, "step outside. We'll discuss this later." Thornton's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting to Nora with a mix of resentment and defeat. He gathered his files, his movements clumsy, and shuffled out, the door closing behind him with a thud that felt final. The room exhaled, the power shifting, Nora's voice now the center of gravity. The office of Edward Thornton felt like a tomb, its dark-paneled walls absorbing the light as the weight of Nora Mitchell's words settled over the room. The frosted glass door had just slammed behind Thornton, his exit a defeated shuffle under the icy command of Charlie Whitaker, Sterling Summit Bank's CEO. Nora stood tall, her caramel brown suit a quiet defiance against the sterile glow of recessed lights, her handbag a steady anchor at her side. Her heart still raced from the confrontation, but her gaze was unwavering, fixed on Charlie and the 2 board members whose stern faces now mirrored the gravity of the moment. The air was charged, not with victory, but with the raw promise of reckoning, a system exposed, a truth laid bare. Nora's voice had shifted the room's center, and as the silence stretched, she knew this was only the beginning. Charlie Whitaker's presence dominated, his silver hair catching the light, his blue eyes burning with a mix of anger and resolve. He turned to Nora, his voice softer now but no less commanding. "Nora, what happened today is a failure of everything we stand for," he said, his words carrying the weight of their shared history, a digital transformation project 2 years ago, when Nora's firm had saved Sterling Summit millions, earning his respect. "This isn't just about you. It's about every client we've let down. I need to know, did anyone else contribute to this?" Nora's eyes flicked to the door, her mind tracing back to the lobby's cold theater. "Claire Bennett, the receptionist," she said, her voice steady, each word precise. "She dismissed me from the start, offered no updates, and prioritized others with warmth she never showed me. I overheard staff junior employees talking about non-VIPs being sidelined. It's not just Thornton. It's the culture he's fostered." Her words were a scalpel, cutting deeper into the bank's flaws, and the board members' pens scratched furiously, their notes a signal that this would not be buried. The board member with wire-rimmed glasses, A man named Harold Grayson leaned forward, his voice gravelly but firm. "This is systemic," he said, his frown deepening. "We've had complaints before, vague, unproven, but this is undeniable. Thornton's been skating on thin ice for years." The other, a younger man with a sharp jaw, nodded, his expression grim. "His flexible protocols have been a problem. We trusted him to manage this branch. Clearly, that was a mistake." Charlie's jaw tightened, his hands clenching briefly before he spoke. "Ed Thornton is suspended, effective immediately," he declared, his voice a gavel striking the room's silence. "We'll launch a full investigation into his practices and the branch's operations. Claire Bennett will be questioned, and will audit every client interaction for the past 6 months." He turned to the board members, his tone unyielding. "I want a report by week's end names, dates, patterns. No excuses." Nora felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was tempered by the weight of what she'd endured. Suspension was a start, but it didn't erase the hour she'd sat invisible. The sting of Claire's indifference, the lobby's parade of privilege. She thought of her team, the 32 employees waiting for news of the loan, and the broader truth she'd voiced. "I'm not the only one." Her mother's words echoed, 3 times the patience. But patience had brought her here, and now it was time for action. Charlie's gaze returned to her, his expression softening. "Nora, I'm sorry you had to force this door open to be heard," he said, gesturing to the office. "But your courage today has done more than expose Thornton. It's forcing us to look at ourselves." He paused, his voice dropping. "I should have seen this sooner. During our project, you warned me about branch inconsistencies, and I didn't dig deep enough. That's on me." Nora nodded, her throat tight. She remembered those conversations, late nights reviewing data, her subtle hints about uneven client treatment brushed off as operational noise. Charlie wasn't blameless, but his willingness to listen now, to act, was a bridge she hadn't expected. "It's not just about seeing it," she said, her voice firm but not accusing. "It's about changing it for everyone who walks through that door, not just me." The younger board member, Thomas Reed, spoke up, his tone earnest. "We'll change it, Miss Mitchell. This audit will be thorough reception protocols, staff training, everything. We'll need your input, if you're willing." Nora's eyes met his, seeing a flicker of sincerity, but she knew promises were only as good as their follow-through. She nodded, a silent agreement, but her stance remained resolute, a reminder that she was here for more than apologies. A soft knock interrupted, and a junior employee peered in, her clipboard trembling slightly. It was Sarah, the young woman who'd slipped Nora water in the lobby, her face pale but determined. "Mr. Wicker," she said, her voice unsteady, "I have something for the audit." She stepped forward, holding a USB drive, her eyes darting to Nora with a mix of fear and resolve. "Emails from Claire Bennett, directing staff to prioritize certain clients' specific names, profiles. I saved them." The room stilled, Sarah's words a bombshell. Charlie's eyes widened, then softened with something like pride. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, taking the drive. This took courage. Harold Grayson's pen stopped, his gaze sharpening on Sarah, who stood taller despite her nerves. Nora felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition of Sarah's risk-defying Claire, risking her job to expose the truth. It was a small act, but in this room it was seismic, a crack in the system's foundation. Thornton's absence loomed, his suspension a shadow over the room. Nora imagined him in the hallway, his polished charm useless now, his career unraveling. She'd heard whispers about him, his rise through connections, his habit of favoring big accounts, to curry favor with the board. But those connections couldn't save him now, not when Nora's voice had reached the bank's core. She thought of the lobby, of Claire's cold smile, of Maggie Caldwell's effortless passage. This wasn't just about Thornton. It was about dismantling the machine he'd oiled. Charlie turned to Nora, his voice resolute. "Your loan application. I'll review it personally. If it's as strong as I expect, it'll be approved today. But more than that, I want your firm to consult on our reforms. We need your perspective to get this right." Nora hesitated, the offer a weight she hadn't anticipated. Consulting meant stepping deeper into Sterling Summit's world, a place that had wounded her. But it also meant shaping its future, ensuring no one else waited as she had. "I'll consider it," she said, her voice steady, her eyes holding Charlie's. "But the loan comes first. My team's counting on me." She thought of the urgent emails, the contract hanging in the balance, the faces of her employees, young, hopeful, trusting. This was for them, for the community she'd vowed to uplift. Charlie nodded, a silent vow. "You'll have an answer by end of day," he said, then turned to the board members. "Get the audit team in here. We start now." The room shifted into motion, pens scratching, phones buzzing, the machinery of accountability grinding to life. Nora stepped back, her handbag a quiet weight, her presence still commanding. She'd forced open a door, and now the bank was scrambling to keep it from closing. As she prepared to leave, Sarah caught her eye, a shy smile breaking through her nerves. Nora returned it, a silent thank you for the water, for the USB drive, for being a spark in the dark. The office door opened, and Nora stepped into the hallway, the frosted glass no longer a barrier but a threshold. She'd won this battle, but the war, for fairness, for respect, was just beginning. The frosted glass door of Edward Thornton's office closed behind Nora Mitchell with a soft thud, sealing off the charged atmosphere of confrontation and accountability. She stepped into the dark-paneled hallway of Sterling Summit Bank, her caramel brown suit still crisp despite the morning's ordeal, her handbag a steady weight against her shoulder. The recessed lights cast a muted glow, their warmth a faint contrast to the cold power she'd just challenged. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, each step a quiet echo of the courage that had carried her through the lobby, past Claire Bennett's indifference, and into the heart of a system that had tried to render her invisible. Houston's summer sun waited beyond the bank's glass walls, but inside, Nora carried a different light, one forged in defiance, tempered by the pain of being sidelined, and now burning with the promise of change. She emerged into the lobby, the marble expanse stretching before her like a battlefield she'd crossed. The chandeliers glittered overhead, their prisms scattering cold light, but the space felt different now, its arrogance dented by her voice. Claire Bennett sat rigid behind her reception desk, her blonde bun flawless but her hands clenched, her eyes darting away as Nora approached. Their gazes met for a fleeting moment, and Nora saw a crack in Claire's polished facade. Embarrassment, perhaps, or the dawning fear of consequences. Nora didn't speak, didn't need to. Her steady look was enough, a silent acknowledgement that the rules had shifted, that Claire's role in the morning's injustice would not be forgotten. She walked past, her head high, the lobby's hum fading as she neared the glass doors. The automatic doors slid open, and Houston's heat enveloped her, a fierce embrace after the bank's sterile chill. The sun blazed across the sidewalk, its light splintering off the glass towers that defined the city's skyline, a world of ambition and unrelenting stakes. Nora paused, her breath catching as the weight of the morning settled into her bones. She'd forced Sterling Summit to face its truth, secured a promise of reform, and seen Thornton suspended, but the victory was bittersweet, laced with the exhaustion of a fight she shouldn't have had to wage. Her mother's voice rose, a steady anchor. Twice the effort, 3 times the patience, 10 times the courage. She'd given all 3 today, but at what cost? She stepped onto the sidewalk, her heels clicking with a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The city pulsed around her, cars humming, pedestrians weaving, the air thick with asphalt and possibility. Nora's phone buzzed in her handbag, a reminder of the world beyond the bank's walls. She pulled it out, the screen glowing with a new email from her lead analyst. Clients pressing hard. Any word on the loan? The words were a jolt, pulling her back to the stakes that had driven her here. The loan for Mitchell Financial Solutions, the expansion that would create jobs, the 32 employees who trusted her to deliver. She typed a quick reply. Meeting. Done. Approval pending. I'll update soon. But as she hit send, her fingers lingered, the weight of the morning pressing against her chest. Nora found shade under a street tree, its leaves rustling in the warm breeze, and let herself breathe. The bank's glass facade loomed across the street, no longer a fortress, but a place she'd reshaped, if only for a moment. She thought of the lobby's parade of privilege, Margaret Caldwell's effortless passage, the gray-suited man, the brokers who'd breezed through. She thought of Claire's cold smile, Thornton's dismissive glance, the junior employee Sarah's quiet courage with the USB drive. Each was a thread in the tapestry of today, a story of power and resistance that stretched beyond her. But it was her story, too, and it carried scars. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. A boardroom in Dallas, 5 years ago, where a white executive had interrupted her pitch to question her credentials, his tone dripping with doubt. Impressive resume, but are you sure you're ready for this scale? He'd asked, his smile patronizing. Nora had answered with data, with poise, but the humiliation had burned, a reminder that her success was always under scrutiny. Today's. Wait, the lobby's silent sorting had reopened that wound, but it had also forged something new, a resolve to not just endure, but to demand. She'd walked into Thornton's office, faced him down, and reached Charlie Whitaker's ear. That was power, hard-won and undeniable. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call. The screen read, Lydia Hayes, her mentor, a black woman who'd navigated Houston's financial world for decades. Nora answered, her voice steady but tired. Lydia. Nora, I heard you stirred up a storm at Sterling Summit, Lydia said, her tone a mix of pride and concern. Words spreading in the circles. Thornton's suspension is big news, but you need to watch your back. Ed's got all eyes, and they don't like being called out. The warning was a cold splash, a reminder that victories in this world came with shadows. Thornton's resentment, Claire's complicity, the board's scrutiny, none would vanish quietly. I know, Nora said, her eyes tracing the bank's facade. But I couldn't stay silent, not today. She thought of Sarah, risking her job with that USB drive, of Charlie's promise to reform. It's not just about me. It's about everyone they've pushed aside. Lydia's voice softened. You're right, but it's still personal. You carried that weight today, and you're carrying it for others now. Don't let it break you. The words landed like a balm, a reminder of the community that had shaped her, the women like Lydia, who'd paved the way. Nora thanked her, promising to meet soon, and hung up. Her gaze drifting to the street dot, she thought of her childhood in rural Texas, of her mother braiding her hair under a porch light, teaching her to stand tall in a world that would try to shrink her. They'll underestimate you, Nora, but that's their mistake. Today, she'd turned that mistake against Sterling Summit, but the cost was heavy. The emotional toll of being unseen, the fear of backlash, the knowledge that one battle didn't end the war. She thought of the thousands of Nora Mitchells out there, waiting in lobbies, boardrooms, lives, their worth dismissed by systems like this one. Her victory was theirs too, but it was only a start. A young woman passed by, her briefcase swinging, her dark skin catching the sun. She glanced at Nora, a fleeting nod of recognition, and Nora wondered if she'd ever sat in a lobby like Sterling Summit's, waiting for a door to open. The thought hardened her resolve. She'd fought for herself, for her team, but also for that woman, for Sarah, for every voice the bank had silenced. Her phone buzzed again. No email yet from Charlie, no loan approval, but she felt a quiet certainty. The contract, the expansion, the jobs, they'd come. She'd make sure of it. Nora stepped out of the shade, the sun warming her shoulders as she walked toward her car. The bank's glass towers faded behind her, but its lessons lingered. She'd forced a reckoning, but the real work changing the system, ensuring fairness, lay ahead. For now, she carried the weight of her stand, the scars of her fight, and the hope that her voice had lit a spark. As she reached her car, she glanced back one last time, the bank a silhouette against the blazing sky. She wasn't done, and neither was the world she aimed to reshape. The Houston afternoon sun blazed across the city's glass towers, its light fracturing into sharp glints that mirrored the tension still simmering in Nora Mitchell's chest. She sat in her office at Mitchell Financial Solutions, a modest space, with a view of downtown skyline. Her caramel brown suit now exchanged for a crisp blouse and slacks. The morning's battle at Sterling Summit Bank lingered like a Bruce Thornton suspension, Charlie Whitaker's promise of reform, Sarah's courageous evidence, but the weight of her team's future anchored her focus. Her laptop glowed with unread emails, the most pressing a thread from her lead analyst. Client's deadline is 5 p.m. Loan status critical. Nora's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mother's voice a quiet echo. Twice the effort. She'd forced open a door at the bank, but the loan's approval was the key to her company's expansion. And the clock was ticking. Her phone buzzed, the screen flashing an email from Sterling Summit Bank. Nora's breath caught as she opened it. The subject line stark: loan application status. The message was brief, signed by Charlie Whitaker himself. Ms. Mitchell, your loan application has been approved. Funds will be available by end of week. Expect a call to finalize details. My deepest apologies again for today's failure. C. Whitaker. Relief flooded her, a wave that loosened the knot in her shoulders. She leaned back, closing her eyes, the victory sinking in. The loan, $2 million for a new branch, new jobs, new futures, was hers. Her team's trust, her community's hopes, were safe for now. But the relief was tempered by the morning's scars, the hour she'd sat invisible, the system she'd had to break to be heard. Nora forwarded the email to her analyst with a note. Approved. Let's secure the contract. She stood, moving to the window, Houston's towers stretching before her like a chessboard where she'd just claimed a piece. The bank's glass facade, a mile away, was a silhouette against the sun, no longer a fortress, but a place she'd reshaped. Charlie's approval wasn't just a transaction. It was a testament to her stand, a crack in the bank's polished machine. Yet Lydia's warning echoed Thornton's eyes, the whispers of backlash, the reality that one victory didn't dismantle a system. Nora's reflection in the glass showed a woman who'd fought and won, but whose eyes held the weight of battles yet to come. Across town, Sterling Summit Bank was a hive of quiet upheaval. Charlie Whitaker sat in a conference room, the same dark-paneled space where Thornton once held court, now stripped of his presence. The board members, Harold, Grayson, and Thomas Reed, flanked him, their faces grim as they reviewed preliminary audit findings. Sarah's USB drive had unleashed a torrent emails from Claire Bennett, directing staff to prioritize high-value clients based on names, appearances, and unspoken criteria. One message, dated a month ago, read, Caldwell and Reynolds. Take precedence. Others wait. The words were a smoking gun, proof of the bias Nora had exposed, and they burned Charlie's conscience. He trusted Thornton, ignored Nora's hints during their past collaboration, And now the bank's reputation hung in the balance. Claire's been reprimanded, Harold said, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting under the lights. She's on probation, pending retraining. But this goes deeper. Thornton set the tone years of favoring big accounts to pad his numbers. He slid a report across the table, its pages detailing client complaints, brushed off as scheduling issues. Charlie's jaw tightened, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned forward. Thornton's suspension is just the start, Charlie said, his voice a controlled burn. We're retraining every employee, revising reception protocols, and auditing all branches. This stops now. His tone was final, but his eyes held a flicker of guilt. Nora's warning 2 years ago about uneven treatment had been a missed chance. He thought of her standing in Thornton's office, her voice a blade, and vowed to make this right. Thomas Reed, the younger board member, hesitated, his sharp jaw tensing. Some staff are pushing back, he said. A few Thorntons, all I say. We're overreacting, that scheduling quirks don't justify this upheaval. They're loyal to Ed, and they're loud. The words hung heavy, a reminder that reform wasn't universal. Charlie's gaze hardened, but before he could respond, Sarah knocked and entered, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Sir, she said, her voice steadier now. The audit team found more. Thornton's performance reviews. He flagged staff who questioned his VIP system as uncooperative. I was one of them. Her eyes flicked to the board members, a mix of fear and defiance. Charlie nodded, his expression softening. You've done the right thing, Sarah, he said, taking the new documents. This stays with us. You're safe. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders easing, but the weight of her stand lingered. She'd risked her job, her future, to back Nora's truth. And the room felt her courage, a quiet echo of the morning storm. Outside, whispers of Thornton's suspension rippled through Houston's financial circles. Nora's phone buzzed. Again, a text from Lydia Hayes, her mentor. Ed's allies are circling. Rumors he's lobbying to fight the suspension. Stay sharp. Nora's stomach twisted, the victory now laced with shadows. Thornton's resentment, glimpsed in his final glance, wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a network of privilege fighting to hold ground. She thought of Claire's clenched hands, the staff's careless comments about non-VIPs, the culture that had normalized her weight. Reform was coming, but it wouldn't come quietly. Back at Sterling Summit, Claire Bennett sat in a small office, her blonde bun unraveling slightly, her face pale as a supervisor outlined her probation. The audit's findings, her emails, her selective smiles had stripped her facade, exposing her role in the bank's bias. She thought of Nora's steady gaze as she'd left the lobby, a look that had pierced her polished armor. Claire wasn't cruel, not deliberately, but she'd been complicit, trained to sort clients by invisible rules. Now, facing consequences, she felt a flicker of shame, a question she couldn't answer. Would I have treated her differently if she'd looked like Maggie Caldwell? Nora, unaware of Claire's reckoning, drove back to her office, the city's heat a steady pulse against her car's windows. She thought of her team, of the young analyst who'd sent those urgent emails, of the community her expansion would serve. The loan was a lifeline, but her stand at the bank was something more, a spark for those who'd been sidelined, a challenge to systems that thrived on silence. Her mother's voice returned, 10 times the courage. Today, that courage had won, but Nora knew the fight wasn't over. Thornton's allies, the bank's resistance, the weight of being a black woman in this world. They'd test her again. As she parked, her phone rang. A board member, Thomas Reed, his voice clipped but respectful. Miss Mitchell, Charlie asked. And me to confirm the loan's processing, he said. We're also moving forward with the audit. Your experience has opened our eyes. If you're willing, We'd value your input on our reforms." Nora paused, the offer echoing Charlie's earlier proposal. It was a chance to shape the bank's future, but it meant re-entering a space that had wounded her. She thanked him, promising to consider it, and hung up, her gaze drifting to the skyline. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Houston's towers. Nora stepped out of her car. The loan approval weight lifted, but the morning's scars a reminder of the cost. She'd won a battle, but the war, for fairness, for respect, was ongoing. As she walked toward her office, she felt the spark she'd lit, a flame that would burn beyond Sterling Summit, for her team, for Sarah, for every voice waiting to be heard. 3 weeks after Nora Mitchell's stand at Sterling Summit Bank, Houston's downtown shimmered under a late summer sun, its glass towers reflecting a city in constant motion. Nora stepped out of her car, her navy blazer catching the light, her stride purposeful as she approached the bank for a follow-up meeting to finalize her loan. The memory of that morning, Claire Bennett's cold dismissal, Edward Thornton's suspension, Charlie Whitaker's promise of reform lingered like a pulse. But today, the bank's glass facade felt different, less a fortress and more a place reshaped by her voice. Inside, the lobby awaited, a space she'd once crossed as an outsider, now a stage for change. Nora's heart carried the weight of her victory, but also the resolve to ensure it wasn't hers alone. Her mother's words a steady echo, 10 times the courage. The automatic doors slid open, and the lobby greeted her with a familiar chill. Automatic doors slid open, and the lobby greeted her with a familiar chill, its marble floor gleaming under chandelier light. But the atmosphere had shifted, subtle, yet undeniable. Gone was Claire Bennett's icy presence at the reception desk. In her place stood a new face, a young man with a warm smile who greeted Nora by name. "Ms. Mitchell, welcome back," he said, his tone genuine, offering her water before guiding her to a seat. Posters lined the walls, bold text proclaiming inclusivity in action, new client protocols, a visible sign of the bank's retraining efforts. Nora's eyes scanned the space, noting employees moving with a new awareness, their glances less guarded, their murmurs less careless. The change was fragile, a seed taking root, but it was there, and she'd planted it. She sat, her handbag beside her, and thought of the loan $2 million, approved days after her confrontation, now fueling Mitchell Financial Solutions' expansion. The contract was secured, her team's future bright with new hires and a second branch in the works. But the loan was only part of her triumph. Charlie's email, Sarah's USB drive, the audit's damning findings. They'd forced Sterling Summit to confront its biases, and Nora's voice had been the spark. Yet Lydia's warning about Thornton's allies, the whispers of resistance, kept her vigilant. Change was never linear, and she knew the bank's old guard wouldn't yield easily. Inside a conference room, Charlie Whitaker waited, his silver hair catching the light, his blue eyes warm but focused. Harold Grayson and Thomas Reed, the board members, flanked him, their notepads open, a stack of audit reports between them. Charlie rose as Nora entered, extending a hand. "Nora, thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared history. "The loan's finalized, but I wanted you here to see what your stand has done." He gestured to the reports, their pages thick with data client wait times, staff emails, patterns of bias stretching back years. Harold adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice steady. "The audit's nearly complete," he said. Sarah's evidence was pivotal. Claire's directives, Thornton's performance reviews, all confirmed a culture of selective treatment. "We fired Thornton, effective last week. Claire's on probation, retrained but under close watch." Nora nodded, her mind flashing to Claire's clenched hands, the shame in her eyes as she'd faced consequences. It wasn't personal. But it was justice, a step toward accountability. Thomas Reed leaned forward, his sharp jaw set. "We're rolling out changes across all branches," he said. "New reception protocols. No client waits over 15 minutes without an update. Mandatory inclusivity training with external consultants. But we're hitting resistance. Some staff Thornton's old allies call it overreach, say we're pandering. They're vocal, and it's slowing us down." His tone was frustrated. But Charlie's gaze remained resolute. "Let them talk," Charlie said, his voice a quiet storm. "This isn't optional. Sterling Summit's reputation rests on trust, and we've broken it too many times. Nora, your experience wasn't isolated. We found similar complaints, clients of color, women, small businesses, all sidelined. That ends now." He slid a report to her, its cover stamped Client Equity Review. "We want your firm to consult on this. Your perspective's critical." Nora's fingers brushed the report, the offer a weight she'd been wrestling with since Charlie's first proposal. Consulting meant shaping the bank's future, ensuring no one else waited as she had, but it also meant re-entering a space. That had wounded her. She thought of her team, of the new branch opening in a Houston neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. Her work was there, with her community, not in Sterling Summit's boardrooms. "I'll review it," she said, her voice steady. "But my focus is my firm, my people. Any consulting would need to align with that." Charlie nodded, respect in his eyes. "Fair enough. Just know your voice has changed us, and we're not stopping." He paused, his tone softening. "I should have listened sooner, Nora. You flagged these issues during our project. I failed you then, but not now." The admission was raw, a leader owning his blind spots, and Nora felt a quiet respect for his candor. A bridge rebuilt as they spoke. Sarah entered, her clipboard replaced by a tablet, her posture taller, promotion evident in her new badge, reception supervisor. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her smile shy but genuine, "I wanted to thank you. Your stand gave me the courage to speak up. The audit's changing things. Staff are listening now." Nora returned the smile, warmth spreading through her chest. Sarah's USB drive, her flagged reviews, had been sparks in the dark. Proof. That one voice could ignite another. "You're the one who took the risk, Sarah," Nora said. "That's courage." The meeting ended, and Nora walked back through the lobby. The posters a reminder of the change she'd sparked. But as she passed the reception desk, an older employee, a man with a pinched expression, one of Thornton's allies, gave her a cold glance. His whisper to a colleague, barely audible. "All this fuss for one client." The words stung. A reminder that reform faced resistance, that Thornton's shadow lingered. Nora held his gaze until he looked away, her resolve unshaken. Change was a fight, and she was ready. Outside, Houston's heat wrapped around her, the sun dipping toward the horizon. Nora drove to a community center where she mentored young entrepreneurs, mostly women of color, her way of giving back. As she spoke to a group, sharing her story without naming the bank, their eyes lit up, their questions bold. "How do you keep going when they shut you out?" Nora smiled, her mother's voice clear. "You don't wait for their permission. You demand your place." The room hummed with energy, a ripple of her stand reaching beyond Sterling Summit. Back at the bank, Claire sat in a training session, her blonde bun looser now, her notebook filled with notes on bias and inclusion. She listened, her shame a quiet teacher, her role in Nora's weight a lesson she'd carry. Sarah, now leading the reception team, greeted every client with warmth, her smile a small revolution. Charlie, in his office, drafted a company-wide memo, crediting a client's courage for the reforms, Nora's name unspoken but felt. The bank was changing, not perfectly, but steadily, its landscape reshaped by a single voice that refused to stay silent. Nora stood outside the community center, the sunset painting the sky in gold. She thought of the young woman she'd seen weeks ago, her briefcase swinging, her nod a silent kinship. Her stand was for her, for Sarah, for every client Sterling Summit had sidelined. The fight wasn't over Thornton's allies, the systems. Inertia, the world's biases, but Nora felt a renewed purpose, a spark that would carry her forward, lighting the way for others. The Houston skyline glowed under a twilight sky, its glass towers catching the last embers of a September sunset, a city of ambition and resilience etched in light and shadow. Nora Mitchell stood on a stage at the Houston Financial Summit, her navy blazer sharp against the spotlight, her voice steady as she addressed a sea of faces: entrepreneurs, executives, students, dreamers. 3 months had passed since her stand at Sterling Summit Bank, a morning that had shattered a system's silence and sparked a wave of change. The loan she'd fought for had fueled Mitchell Financial Solutions' expansion, opening a new branch in a Houston neighborhood where opportunity was a rare guest. But tonight, as she shared her story, Nora's words reached beyond her company, beyond the bank, to a world hungry for courage. Her mother's voice, a constant guide, whispered, 10 times the courage. She was here to pass that courage on. Lobbies like the one I walked into aren't just rooms, Nora said, her voice resonant, each word a spark. They're battlegrounds, where systems decide who's seen and who's erased. I waited over an hour, invisible, while others were ushered through. But I didn't stay silent. I walked through that door, demanded answers, and changed the game. The audience leaned in, some nodding, others scribbling notes, their eyes reflecting her. Fire. A young black woman in the front row, her briefcase at her feet, watched with a hunger Nora recognized, the hunger to be heard. Nora's gaze softened, her story no longer just hers, but theirs, a legacy taking root. Sterling Summit Bank had become a case study in reform, its transformation a ripple felt across Houston's financial world. Charlie Whitaker, the CEO, had made good on his promise, implementing new protocols that ensured no client waited over 15 minutes without an update. Inclusivity training was mandatory, led by external consultants, and the audit sparked by Sarah's USB drive had exposed a network of biased Claire Bennett's emails. Thornton's skewed reviews' use of VIP favoritism. Edward Thornton was gone, fired after his suspension, but whispers of his influence lingered. A lawsuit filed by a former ally, claiming unfair dismissal, had stirred controversy, with online forums buzzing. Was Thornton scapegoated? The noise was a reminder that change was a fight, not a finish line. Nora had declined Charlie's offer to consult, choosing instead to focus on her firm and her community. But she'd met with him last week, in a boardroom now free of Thornton's shadow, where he'd shared the bank's progress. We're not perfect, Charlie admitted, his silver hair catching the light, his blue eyes earnest. Some staff still resist, call it woke nonsense, but we're holding firm. Your stand woke us up, Nora. He'd handed her a report client equity review, year 1, crediting an unnamed client's courage. Nora knew it was her voice etched in the bank's new path. Sarah, now a reception supervisor, had become a quiet hero. She greeted every client with warmth, her smile a small revolution, her flagged reviews a catalyst for reform. At a staff meeting, she'd shared her story, crediting Nora's defiance for her own. I saw her stand, and I couldn't stay silent, she'd said, her voice steady, her tablet a shield. Her promotion was a signal courage was rewarded, complicity was not. Claire, still on probation, attended training sessions, her blonde bun looser, her notebook filled with reflections. She'd apologized to Sarah, a halting gesture, but a start. The lobby, once a stage for exclusion, now hummed with a tentative fairness, its posters a promise kept. Nora's phone buzzed in her pocket, A text from Lydia Hayes, her mentor. Proud of you tonight. Thornton's lawsuit's floundering, but stay vigilant. You're a target now. The words were a cold reminder of the cost. Social media had erupted after her summit speech went viral. Some praising her as a trailblazer, others, Thornton's allies, calling her divisive. An anonymous letter had arrived at her office, its typed words chilling. You won't change us. Nora had filed it with security, her resolve unshaken. She'd faced worse boardrooms that doubted her, executives who dismissed her, and she'd built a company from nothing. This was just another challenge, and she was ready. On stage, Nora's voice grew stronger, her story weaving into a broader call. Courage isn't just for you, she said, her eyes sweeping the audience. It's for the ones who come after, the ones waiting in lobbies, in meetings, in lives where systems try to shrink them. I stood for my team, for my community, for every person who's been told they don't belong. And you can too. The young woman in the front row clapped first, her hands fierce, sparking a wave that filled the room. Nora smiled, her heart full, knowing her spark had lit theirs. Offstage, she met the woman, a recent graduate named Aisha, her eyes bright with ambition. I've been in rooms like that, bank, Aisha said, her voice trembling but firm. Your story, it's why I keep going. Nora handed her a card for her mentorship program, a promise to guide her forward. The moment was small but seismic, a thread in the legacy she was weaving. One voice lifting another dot back at Sterling Summit. Charlie stood in the lobby, watching a young black man sign in, greeted promptly by Sarah's team. The man's briefcase swung like Aisha's, his nod to Sarah a silent kinship. Charlie thought of Nora, of the report on his desk, of the work still ahead. The bank was a model now, its reforms studied by competitors, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Thornton's lawsuit, the staff's resistance, the world's biases, they'd test them all. But Nora's courage had set a standard, one he'd uphold. Nora drove home under a starlit sky, Houston's towers fading behind her. She thought of her childhood, her mother's porch lessons, the scars of every room where she'd been underestimated. She thought of Sarah's smile, Claire's notebook, Asha's clap, the thousands of others still waiting. Her stand had changed a bank, a community, a piece of the world. But it was a beginning, not an end. The anonymous letter, Thornton's shadow, the fight for fairness, they'd linger. But so would her resolve. As she parked, her phone glowed with a new email, a speaking request from a national conference. Share your story of courage. Nora smiled, the spark still burning. Her legacy wasn't just in the bank's reforms or her firm's growth. It was in the voices she'd inspired, the system she'd challenged, the courage she'd passed on. Nora Mitchell's story is a testament to the power of one voice against a system's silence. It teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it, to demand respect, to challenge injustice, to stand for those who can't. Her fight at Sterling Summit Bank wasn't just for a loan. It was for dignity, for fairness, for a world where no one waits in the shadows. The lesson is clear. Change starts with a single spark, but it grows with collective action. We all have a lobby, a moment, a chance to speak. Nora's courage reminds us to seize it, to build a world where every voice is heard, every person seen. This story is one of many, a thread in the tapestry of human resilience. Legacy Stories is dedicated to sharing these tales, narratives of courage, justice, and hope that inspire us to act. Subscribe to Legacy Stories today, share your own journey, and join us in amplifying voices that change the world. Together, we can light sparks that become flames, building a future where no one is left waiting. Nora stood on her porch, the night air warm, the stars a quiet promise. She thought of Asha, of Sarah, of every client who'd walk into Sterling Summit and be seen. Her legacy was alive, growing, a courage that would echo long after her. As she stepped inside, Houston's skyline glowed behind her, a city of light, of fight, of hope.